Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me? So working on the sound on our end, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, there we go.
If you were calling me.
All right.
Wow. That's on top of my list.
So far. We'll get into it. You should be good, man. Yeah.
In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the general welfare, secure the blessings of living for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States. Schoolhouse Rock. Come on.
I've never seen that.
You never see a little guy, and then you go, I'm just a Bill, the little one where he just.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. How are you doing?
Good.
Are we the only ones right now?
Believe so.
Anthony, it looks like we have a quorum. What do we know about others attending?
Oh, who do we have? Oh, we were waiting on Miss Edson. She said she was going to be in attendance, sir. But
Okay. Give her a couple minutes.
everyone is here, sir.
Okie dokie. Then I will call to order this, the NCTD Executive Committee meeting for March 8th of 2021. Anthony, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Tony Krantz,
Here.
Jewel Edson,
Here.
Sharon Jenkins,
Here.
Dan Quirk.
Here.
All right, and Anthony will now provide a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures for those people at the NCTD headquarters.
Yes, sir. For those here in the building, in the event of emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please do so using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Okay, very good. Anthony, do we have any public comments?
We do not, sir.
All right, there are 4 items on the agenda today, and Karen Tukolsky, the Chief Administrative Officer, is going to review agenda item number 1, which is the proposed CY 2021 Executive Committee work plan.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you. Are we able to pull this up, Anthony? All right, well, Anthony is pulling up our work plan. So for the executive committee, we have 3 meetings proposed for our calendar for 2021. Today's meeting, obviously, we are all here for, and we have a full agenda for that. We're additionally proposing a meeting in April where we would have a review of 2 different board policies for some potential changes, board policies number 2 and 18. And then staff would also be presenting information on a proposed new rail operations and facilities maintenance business model. So those are the 2 items that we would have proposed for April. The next meeting we would propose for executive committee is our annual meeting in October, where we have the full review of all 35 or so board policies. We would also look at hopefully being able to discuss a calendar 22 board retreat and first annual State of the District event. And then we would have the closed session for the executive director's annual performance review. The dates for the meetings in those months would be established as those months drew closer. And then obviously also if additional topics come up that merit discussion at any time throughout the year, meetings can be scheduled ad hoc, even if they're not currently on this work plan. So that is the work plan that we have before you for consideration and recommend adoption for today. And there it is.
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions?
No,
No, no, no, no. So are we looking for motions or what are we doing on this?
Yes, please. Motion to adopt.
I move we adopt.
second by Jenkins.
Motion by Edson, sorry.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to approve or adopt the executive committee work plan for calendar year 2021. Board Chair Krantz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes,
and Board Member Quirk.
Yes.
Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Great. Next up is Yoon Park Lynch, the CFO, and Matt Tucker, the executive director, and they will review agenda item number 2, which is the executive director's report on proposed FY 2022 budget guidance and strategic areas of focus.
Good afternoon, members of the executive committee. I will be providing today the executive director's report on the fiscal year 2022 budget, and also provide the strategic areas of focus for the next upcoming fiscal year. Before we get started, I just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of the budget process at NCTD. Some concepts that are important to understand, more than anything, the basis of accounting, the basis of how we prepare our budget. We utilize the accrual basis of accounting. That means that we recognize revenues when they are earned and expenses when they are incurred. Accrual basis is very different from the cash basis. Cash basis is based when cash comes in, cash comes out, whereas the accrual basis follows an economic activity standpoint, which is not the earning process. Also within our board policy, we are required to adopt a balanced budget. Within a balanced budget, that means that our total revenues must be equal or exceed our total expenses. So therefore, NCT does not prepare operating budgets that are in a deficit. We also estimate our revenues conservatively. What that means is that within a range of possible scenarios, we always adopt the lower range. That provides us some cushion, in case the estimates don't come exactly how we anticipated, and it gives you some flexibility. So we estimate our revenues in the very conservative side. Our budget process also includes a capital improvement program. The capital improvement program was adopted by our board back in January. And when we go back to our board in June, and that capital improvement program will be ratified. And as far as debt is concerned, we only use short-term and long-term debt appropriately when we envision that there's going to be some temporary cash flow needs and for emergencies. We don't anticipate any debt to fund operations. The only outstanding debt that the district has currently is related to the procurement of the sprinters back in 2008, and potentially drawing some funding from the SANDAG commercial paper program in order to accelerate the payments for some of the coastal equipment. But again, we do not anticipate incurring any debt as part of our operating budget process. Next slide. This slide, without going into much details, it lists the different staff at NCTD that are responsible for the budget cycle. Things to mention is that the division chiefs are ultimately responsible for the budgets within the divisions, and the executive director will make the final determination and propose the budget to the board directors for adoption. And this is planned to occur in the month of June. As far as budget monitoring controls, within our financial system, we ensure that throughout the year, our expenses do not exceed our budgeted items. Every department and every division has to manage their budgets within their own financial constraints. However, if for some reason there is interdivision transfers needed, those are approved by the executive director. Overall, our total expenditures should never exceed the total budget expenses that were approved by the board prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. The budget document, there's a lot of documents, a lot of sections within our budget document. I'm just going to mention some of the, the highlights, not going through all the detail. Our service implementation plan, which lists the service that we plan for NCTD in the next 5-10 years, are included in the budget document, and as well as the ridership forecast. We also show our total operating revenues and expenses, the expenses by department, the total FTEs or number of employees that are within our budget document. Our capital improvement program detail is also listed, our 5 years forecast, plus the detail of all the projects that will be funded in the next 5 fiscal years. We also have, as part of the budget process, it's not part of the document per se, but as part of the process, we also request the board to adopt the classification and compensation schedule and the cost recovery fee schedule and the disadvantaged business enterprise goal for the upcoming fiscal year. This slide has a listing of the critical dates for the budget process. It's a timeline, it's a chronological timeline. Today we are in March, so we already had our internal kickoff here at NCTD that happened in the first week of February. But here we list what we call the critical dates, effect beginning today. We are here today with the executive committee presenting our budget guidance and for the upcoming fiscal year. In the March agenda for the third Thursday of March, we'll be setting the public hearing for June 17 for consideration of adoption of our budget. Then in April, we'll be making presentations to the PAF committee on the budget process and also provide some information to the executive committee and the board on business models and the contracts transitions for NCTD. We will have a draft document prepared by May 16, and by April 30th, we should have our final service implementation plan plus some of the schedules that are accompanying our budget document. And through the month of May, we'll be presenting our draft proposed budget to the Performance Administration and Finance Committee. Final document to be prepared by May 28th. Posted for public review on June 1st, and then presented to the board for approval and adoption on June 17th. Then just kind of a quick recap on where we are today. We are all facing similar economic situations still within the pandemic. Good news is that things appear to be improving as vaccination rates are increasing every day. And our numbers here, at least in San Diego County, our transmission and our rates appear to be going to have a positive trend. But just to kind of give a quick context on what has happened in the last year since COVID-19 began pretty much in the month of March last year. About 65% of transit agencies across the US have been forced to cut service. Good news is that the CARES Act that was passed in March 2020 provided significant relief in order to avoid service cuts, furloughs, and layoffs. NCTD, through the CARES Act, received an allocation of about $95.7 million. And we forecast that those funding should last us through early fiscal year 2023. And then we should be able to achieve a balanced budget in the next 5 fiscal years. One of the things that we do have to point out is that we have, because NCTD, we have been fairly conservative and very proactive in, in cost savings and also mitigating risk. We have throughout several years been able to increase our cash reserves. So if you compare where our cash was back in 2008, NCTD had cash balances of $16.5 million. And as of the end of the last fiscal year, our cash had grown by almost $50 million to $66.6 million. So with that said, I am going to now relay the presentation to our Executive Director, Matt, who will continue from this point forward.
All right, and I may need you to click for me.
Okay, I'll do that.
Please. So I'm going to just talk through a little bit in terms of the budget guidance. I will note before I jump into the proposed budget guidance, the pending stimulus bill that is going back to the House for approval, then on to the President, provides $30.5 billion for public transit. And the focus of that distribution is to get transit agencies up to 132% of their 2018 operating budget, which means we should experience north of a $40 million infusion of additional funds from the Federal Transit Administration at some point.
Will there be strings attached to that?
No, I mean, the language that I've seen is consistent with the initial CARES Act money that removed a lot of the restrictions and allowed significant flexibility in terms of the dollars. So for now, everything looks really, really good in terms of that additional funding coming to the district.
So we can either hold it for, use it for operations or capital projects or whatever the board deems appropriate.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
I have a comment or question about that.
Go ahead. Sure.
Since this is one-time money that we'll be receiving, as you go to budget that, would you be looking to use that for one-time expenditures versus funding of ongoing expenditures?
Absolutely. That's consistent with the board policy. We can only use one-time money for one-time activities. And quite frankly, part of what is happening is just to make sure transit agencies have sufficient capacity. It doesn't change the bigger question for the district is that we have significant needs on the capital side of the house. And so we try to be very conservative in approach, and we would encourage the board as we move forward with allocating those dollars is to continue a conservative approach to how we spend those dollars and create maximum flexibility for us beyond the upcoming fiscal year 2022, but create flexibility for us for fiscal year 23, 24, and 25.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Matt, so I had a question. I know the NCTD gets significant dollars from Sandag and Transnet. If we're getting all this money from the Fed CARES Act, is that an opportunity to reduce the amount that is coming from Sandag and Transnet?
No, not at all. And in fact, there's a couple of different pots that Transnet provides funding, and all of those pots are insufficient on the capital side of the shop. We have about 1 billion plus of capital needs that we assume a significant amount of funding would come from Transnet. If you follow the discussions at Sandag, there is no money available for the next 5 years. And it will be the next after that next 5 years before there to be any discussion about adding additional funding for capacity enhancing projects that stand shovel ready for construction today.
Okay.
All right. So if everybody is good, I'm going to just walk through this presentation. So in terms of budget guidance, obviously the top priority is employee and customer safety as we recover from the impacts of COVID-19. One of the things that we want to do is continuously monitor vaccination rates for the larger society, but also try to get information from our employees. So we're planning a couple of voluntary surveys to help us gain some information along certain milestones of how much of our workforce has been fully vaccinated. Another item that we think is important is readiness for reopening, to include more business intelligence. And that's going to be one of the key challenges, is us to be knowing, to close that gap about what are some of these trends that may be permanent, but for us to conduct additional surveys to gather feedback from customers, businesses, and other key stakeholders. We're going to increase our investment in marketing and communications. And I can tell you, we just had a preliminary discussion with Deloitte. And I think Deloitte probably will be coming on board as a partner to help us really gain some psychographic and other types of information that could give us a little bit more business intelligence than we have today. We do envision kind of a steady recovery of ridership and customer revenue. So we're planning to maintain and restore services, and then begin some implementation of the microtransit service that we've talked about in San Marcos and Carlsbad. And as with all of our budgets, we will continue to optimize expenses. That's kind of one of the things that placed us in a really good position. I think the board, what was fortunate for the board is that you didn't experience the chaos that a lot of transit agencies were experiencing in March of last year with COVID-19. Some transit agencies did not have 60 days or 30 days of working capital, and they were really forced into some draconian action straight away. We were in a different position. We had already been planning for likely an economic downturn. Luckily, yes, the CARES dollars came in, but we were at a good position to manage at least the short term of that. One of our priorities is going to continue to be maintenance of equipment. One of the things that we're going to be doing is bringing to the board a item to support enhanced cleaning. I think one of the things that's going to be important as people come back to transit, come back to an open society, that we provide people visible evidence at our facilities and on board our vehicles of us cleaning. So we're going out to procure the services via task order. It should be coming to the board in the next couple of months. We're going to continue to focus on our zero delay program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some business model changes under the next item. But we're going to continue to focus in on how can we provide the very best service we can with no delay and improvements that our customers and the market demands. One of the key things that the board's going to be briefed on is revamping the rail business model. I know the board chair and I have had some discussions about this. The Bombardier contract is slated to end in 2023 for the new members. That is our combined rail operations contractor to include facilities maintenance. We've been looking at this contract for some time. And as we think about reprocuring the service, we are thinking that certain elements of the service should be brought in-house, directly provided by personnel hired by NCTD. Certain elements would continue to be contracted. And we're also looking at leveraging some things that we've started to do in terms of standing up technical services and material management agreements that are separate from those contracts, as a means for us to really improve maintenance while containing and managing our costs for the long term of the district. So there are going to be a couple of other opportunities where we're going to come back to the executive committee. We're going to go to the PAF committee, and then we're going to come to the full board with a really detailed presentation relative to our proposal to revamp the rail business model. Obviously, we're going to continue to focus in on improving the customer riding experience. That's going to include the new fare system, as well as new fare boxes that we're going to be coming to the board in the month of April with. And we're also ready to start advancing real-time technologies on our platforms for Coaster and Sprinter. And so that's going to be a procurement that we have fully funded. We just need to get it back on the street. It's going to be tied to a larger statewide initiative that NCTD has been participating in. Revenue and real estate development. Can't highlight this enough. You're going to be seeing a ton of this from us. We're starting to focus in on Solana Beach, Carlsbad, and select Sprinter stations. And so you're going to be hearing presentation and seeing some action items we think kind of the key for this region is really the long-term reconfiguration of land use that's going to need to take place as we continue to experience population growth. We're going to have likely a more densely packed environment. And we think that to the degree that we can become early leaders in terms of recreating land use around our stations, it will support transit ridership and also add additional revenue to NCTD. So that's important for us. As always, we are always thinking about the next recession. We don't know how long this ride's going to be. Maybe Board Member Quirk is going to tell us that, but it's something that we have to keep in mind. I also think, within this whole realm of political economic downturn, we have to understand the political shifts that may take place coming out of this pandemic that may lead to increased focus at both local, state, and national level about debt levels and what that could mean potentially if we don't have a new transportation bill passed. All of these things are things that we have to make sure we're prepared for as we go through this next 5-year cycle. It's no different than the last cycle. It's just better to be planning for that and capture those potentials in various scenarios. And then obviously fund our state of good repair and priority capital needs. We made some significant advancements last year. The good news is we're continuing progress this year. We just received a grant to support facilities improvements to support the implementation of our zero emission bus program. And we're going to be preparing grants to help offset the cost of procuring additional fuel cell buses in the future. We do have to keep in mind that we have a significant amount of bridges that need to be replaced, for which there is no funding, with the exception of state of good repair projects that we will fund on a case-by-case basis. So with all of that, we've reached that time for committee discussion and direction. You guys are going to need to provide me some feedback and direction as we move this budget process along, identify if there are additional public policy goals and expectations that you would like to see in the budget, taking in mind financial and economic considerations, and as well as always the regulatory environment. As Eunice stated, we have to have a balanced budget, so we can't fudge the numbers, and we have to make sure that we are prioritizing our capital needs on an annual basis. And like anything, there comes with risks, rewards, and negative impacts. And I think it's important for the board to keep that in mind in our decisions, in all of our decisions about what are the risk, rewards, and negative impacts downstream from those. And again, we look at the fiscal year 22 to 26 timeframe as a significant opportunity for the district. I think we have kind of created a good niche for ourselves, that if we can continue the approach of being prepared and ready for opportunity, opportunity will come our way. So with that, I will be quiet and take feedback.
I'm ready to chat if I can through the
Yeah,
chair.
I just failed to turn on my mic and I was calling on you to speak.
Okay, thank you. I'll lower my funny little hand there. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation, and Yoon as well. One of kind of a question and feedback at the same time is you discussed readiness to reopen and recovery of ridership. I'm curious about the criteria. I know that we have projects planned in San Marcos and Carlsbad, but is there planned expansion into other communities? Because I think that microtransit servicing Carlsbad and San Marcos is a great model, and something that's really very much needed to get people from our rail corridors into communities and in a way that they can, actually get to work, get back home, grocery shop on the way, that kind of stuff. So again, is there planned expansion into other communities, and also what does that entail budget-wise for us if that's something that we're interested in?
Yes, ma'am. So there is planned expansion. We decided that these two locations would be the pilot locations, and and testing location. So we need to go through a learning curve with this. We're intending to come to the board, I believe in the month of April, to approve the procurement of the app to support microtransit. I think we have vehicles coming online later this year. So we do plan to expand it further into our services. It's tied to ultimately, Jewel, our intent to really optimize Breeze bus service, to really focus in on major corridors with significantly improved hitways every 15 minutes, and then augmenting this with microtransit to improve first and last mile connections for both bus and rail. The initial implementation will not be an increase to the budget baseline whatsoever. It's just replacing hours with fixed route bus with hours for microtransit. So no cost increase there. The additional increases will be in the future years if we're going to move the bus system to 15-minute hitways. And so that would likely be in the latter part of fiscal year 2024, 2025. There's also just for a reminder for you, I think you know this, we're advancing a study that's going to look at the road network in collaboration with all of our cities to see what we can do to improve the speeds and reliability of buses, to include looking at implementing bus rapid transit, limited bus service, and enhanced bus services on the 10 primary routes that we have.
And with the pilot, we had the pilot that was shut down in Carlsbad, and you partnered with both the city of Carlsbad and with Sandag on that, or NCTD, not just you, Matt. Is the intention to use that same provider and the same pilot?
No, man, we're procuring a new provider. We're still partnering closely with Sandag because this was one of their concepts that we were advancing ahead of the Big Five moves, but it became a part of the Big Five moves. So we're still working closely with Sandag. We wanted to move faster than what Sandag was moving. They were still are into a significant study phase. So this is, as you said, kind of a replacement for what we had in Carlsbad, but it's also a little bit of expansion which we have in Carlsbad, and it will help us to look at a couple of routes that we do think we will be able to eliminate by the implementation of this service at some point in time.
And were there any significant lessons learned from that first pilot?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there was a high level of customer satisfaction with that service. The quality of the service was great. I think for us, what we looked at it was, remember, through that partnership, it was a separate contract. One of the things that we're intending to do, Joel, is to perform the work with contracted staff that we have through MV Transit. But we also want to have greater control over the technology and over the data. So we're going to procure it, and we're going to be a lot more explicit in terms of our requirements and ownership of the data. So that was one of the key pieces, is we want to be able to control the data a lot more than we were in the past. But we also too want to make sure that we have employees that are committed to the service long term. Part of the service likely will also morph into connecting people to school. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from parents who are interested in school transportation is that they're not comfortable with Uber or Lyft providing their kids a transportation to school, but they are comfortable with NCTD providing middle school and high school kids transportation from home to school.
I've actually had that feedback in my community, and from parents whose kids go to, the high schools Solana Beach doesn't have a high school, so our kids go all over the place. And I think that that's true pretty much throughout the county. I do believe that there's a really big need for that. And I do think that that would increase ridership.
Me too.
Okay. Thank you, Joel.
I just had a general comment, and it's kind of consistent with past ones, maybe more focused on the train. That's where a big part of my interest is. But just as we develop budgets, intermediate and longer term, trying to understand what the impact is for the various routes on the return to normal after COVID. And then you start thinking a little bit longer term with, things like Tesla and self-driving cars, what those impacts are. So I would like to see, budget forecasts and maybe ridership forecasts try to explicitly include some of that thinking. And maybe that's a Sandag or joint Sandag type of effort. But my concern is, especially with regards to the coaster, that the ridership numbers are going to stay very low. You know, one of the leading sections in the Union Tribune today was talking about, you know, the trend of remote workers post-COVID. And, you know, I'm looking at it right now, 55% of those surveyed by PwC want to work remotely at least 3 days a week. And you think about traffic congestion impacts, and then, you know, especially on the NCTD, that tends to be more of a maybe an affluent remote from work type of commuter that will choose to work remotely and not take the train. So anyway, I'm just hoping that some of our forecasts and projections are looking very seriously at that. It's just my concern is that the numbers are going to not rebound to what they were pre-COVID, and they're going to stay pretty low for a long time.
Yeah, can you use that hand raise thing too? I don't know.
Oh, gotcha. Yep. I'll use that next
You
time.
want to respond to that, or just take a note, Matt?
What did you say, Tony? I didn't hear you.
Do you want to respond to that, or do you want to make a note, or how do you want to?
Oh, well, so we are going to develop projections for the budget, but I can tell you, consistent with the board policy, we're going to budget extremely conservative, and we're going to set a different target for ridership. But the key piece that I've said to staff, we're going to wait till next year to really start conducting really significant surveys and focus groups, because we need to make sure that we get clearly through kind of the current impacts of COVID-19. And then we will start surveying businesses, the general public, and others to gain greater information about what do they see for the future. It's practically impossible to project today because we don't know the full reopening plans. And I think within this 5-year forecast, you won't really get to a point really to understand long-term trends until you're likely in year 3 or year 4. Then you will understand kind of the trend that is going to manifest itself for a period of time. But again, trends come and go. And so the board just has to continue to move along and be flexible in terms of how we make decisions, taking into consideration all of those things that Mr. Quirk has mentioned, evolving and emerging technologies like autonomous vehicles, like Uber, like Lyft, like Tesla, and what impacts they may or may not have on transit.
Did you have any follow-up, Dan?
No, thank you. Appreciate that, Matt.
And on those points, Matt, the board had set in motion a strategy to acquire enough train sets and new equipment that we could support half-hour peak service on the coaster and 1 hour headways off peak. And while we have reduced the service, currently. Do you anticipate in next 6 months to a year us getting to those goals that we had set when we started acquiring the new equipment?
Yes, sir. So the new equipment won't get here until 2022 at the earliest, and really 2023 is.
Well, that's the 2 new train sets you're talking about, right?
Yes, sir. So the 2 new train sets you won't see either until April of 2023 or October of 2023, depending upon the time and the commissioning timeline. In between that time, we do plan to implement improved frequencies. But as we've stated before, it's going to be more milestone based. Now, as we sit today, I've said to staff that when we get to October of this year, we will have restored back all of coaster service to pre-COVID levels, because we do want to make sure we're just ahead of the full reopening of the economy. And so we have a current plan to begin adding some of the midday service back this April, and then fully restoring by October against that baseline. And then the following year, we likely will add additional service. And a lot of this will be done at a fairly low incremental rate because we will be using, we will have better utilization rates of the employees and the equipment. So it doesn't significantly cost us a lot of money to add the additional services. The additional services in 2023 with the new equipment, that additional incremental cost is going to be funded by Sandag from existing Transnet dollars.
Yeah, and I had noticed, I know that when we were originally talking about just replacing locomotives, that there was an anticipation that there would be increased frequencies just because of the dependability that new locomotives would present. So that was kind of what I was looking for, and I heard that in your answer. So that's great. I have also noticed there are fewer Twitter posts about canceled service because of mechanical issues. And I don't know if that's because Bombardier is doing a better job or whether these new locomotives are already having that kind of an impact. But either way, that's good. Are you seeing Bombardier? Are we still kind of on the same level of issues related to their service? Are we,
Well, so Tony, I think because you and I discussed this, we entered into that technical services and material management agreement with Siemens.
Yep.
So as part of that package, we're getting all of the materials. We also have on-site personnel. We also have predictive and remote analytics. And we also have a significant requirement for performance reliability targets for them that essentially equate to maybe about 1 to 2 failures per year system-wide. I'm not sure if they're going to hit that target. I set that bar really, really high for them. But so far, we've seen a lot more robustness and attention to detail because we have stood up that separate technical services and material management agreement. We also are benefactors because other people have purchased these locomotives and some of the issues have previously been worked out. So far, so good.
Good. I don't have board policy 17 memorized, so I was a little surprised to see that chiefs can reallocate money. How involved are you in decisions for a chief to reallocate money within their budget?
It's not a significant amount. I'm very involved. I meet with Yoon very frequently, and I would never be surprised by any movement of money because we document every transfer dollar that needs to take place.
Okay, and slide 12, talking about the marketing for reopening, there was a kind of a committee going for that purpose. And I think that was fairly early on in the pandemic. And because it was such a mess in DC, it wasn't clear we were ever going to come out of the pandemic. It might have been a permanent situation as far as I could tell. Are we, now that the vaccination rates are climbing and the infection rate is dropping, do we anticipate reconvening that marketing committee, or are you just going to move forward with some experts?
No, we're continuing to have those discussions with our regional partners. But one of the things that has happened, I don't know if we communicated, but Kimmy Wall has left NCTD, has taken a job closer to home. So we're in the process of recruiting for marketing director of marketing and communications. And I think we should hopefully complete that recruitment by the end of the year. One of the key things for us is additional business intelligence. So as I mentioned earlier, and I know I was going kind of fast, we're actually have started some discussions with Deloitte. We have some really great service plans. We have some really great data that we've gleaned, but we need to transform that into a little bit more dynamic business intelligence. So our plan is to have one of the more robust marketing budgets that we've had over the next couple of years to support business intelligence, and also to begin the process of communicating forward with people to attract more people to the system as we implement improvements to the system. So we're laser focused in on marketing and communications as one of the key things that we need to be on point with over the course of the next 5 years.
Does this rollout of Pronto allow for the opportunity to kind of dual market or gather intelligence or whatever you want to call it, so that we can maybe get more bang for the buck?
So in terms of what NCTD is implementing, yes, because we're planning to link that system to other key business systems that we have on board our vehicles, so that we would be able to link you to the specific fare product, to the specific location that you got onto the bus. I don't believe these fare systems attract new riders. I think the service itself attracts new riders, but we're setting the system up to give us better business intelligence to understand link travel between passengers than what we've ever had before. So yes, we are planning to really maximize the data flow from that.
Okay, great. Sharon.
Am I muted? No. Thank you. I have a question. Way back on page 2, there was comment about the only debt right now is the Sprinter debt. When is that? What is the time frame of when that's to be finalized?
I believe it's 2034 or 2035
Okay.
to be paid off.
Okay. And do we ever evaluate if there's any benefit to accelerating that, or even if there, I guess if there's a need to, I guess the need would be to not pay as much interest. But is that ever evaluated?
We did evaluate that with PFM. I think it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And the way that financial transaction is structured, it is not cost beneficial for NCTD to do that.
Okay. Okay. And then I guess just my general comments, since we're kind of in this discussion phase, one thing I really like is that that we're always conservative with the calculating we err on the side of caution whether it's income or expenses. So I just want to make sure we continue to do that. I think we're on good, strong financial footing. I'd like to see us maybe as these funds anticipated funds come in and you get a better picture of what's there, maybe evaluate, depending on what the need is over the next few years, are there maybe some one-time uses that might be beneficial to use some of that money for? I don't know what that would be, but maybe a project that we had to put off because we didn't have funding, or something, that COVID took away that we want to try to bring back. So not that I think we want to just blow that money on anything that comes up. I just think we need to be mindful on if we might be able to use it strategically for something that we have a need for. One-time use.
Yes, ma'am. And I would just tell you, our focus would be to use the money for capital as the primary goal.
Right. Right.
That's what our intent would be. And it would be more so that, again, you've seen our unfunded list. So we would be managing through to navigate a process whereby hopefully it would result in using all of those dollars for capital needs.
And what other significant needs, liabilities would we have that if we put some one-time money towards it might be beneficial? I guess one thing that comes to mind would be our pensions. We put a certain amount in, if it lowered it over the long run, things like that, maybe.
Well, I'm not a big fan of putting the money in the pension.
Okay.
I think we're at a funded status that makes sense for us given where we are at. There's not a high return because it's so volatile and subject to the performance of the stock market. So our focus, my recommendation would be, to the degree that we don't need those absolutely for operating, would be we have a ton of state of good repair bridge projects, Camp Pendleton, Rose Creek, and other places that we would invest those dollars, as well as to support ongoing bus replacement and other types of projects for which we have a clear capital need.
Okay, thank you.
Should we be looking at whether accelerating partnerships or enhancing the partnerships that we have with the jurisdictions in which we have transit stations for land use questions and quality of life improvements like crossings and quiet zones?
Well, the board policy, we are very supportive of quiet zones and crossings to the degree that those communities are able to fund such projects. We
Right,
do.
and I'm speaking from the perspective of having these federal dollars windfalls, and maybe we should help to spur those conversations forward in some way or another, either by participating in the construction costs or the planning costs or the like.
Personally, again, I would not recommend that, and it would be inconsistent with our capital improvement program evaluation process, because those projects would not rank at the top of our list. We fund safety and state of good repair projects as the top priority of the district. Board is free to change that, but there are lots of asset management requirements for which the district is subject to, for which we would have to explain to the FTA why we were spending dollars on those things versus things that were at the top of our list for state of good repair and safety projects.
Okay, did you get enough direction?
Yes, sir.
I'm not happy with that answer, frankly, but whatever. I've been around long enough to know that there are these very important factors that when the train horn sounds at 1 a.m., I'm not thinking about those very important policy questions. So what would you like here? Do we need a motion or what would we?
No. It's really just for you guys to say, hey, Tucker, this is okay. Or Tucker, you stink, start all over again. So I'm hearing general consensus. This is pretty consistent with what we've had today in the prior years, with obviously the adjustment for the COVID-19 impacts.
How about a hybrid of that? Tucker, you stink, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no more hands are raised. So with that, we will move on to the next item, and Karen Tukolsky will be back up to talk about a potential cost of living allowance increase for NCTD employees.
All right, I'm going to give up on the camera. I'm not sure it's working the way I intended to. Good afternoon again. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a flashback here. It's been almost a year now since we've been in the COVID-19 pandemic. And as those of you who were on the board then recall, we were just in the process of finalizing our FY 2021 operating budget when the pandemic began, when the state and regional stay-at-home orders initially began. You also recall that those orders had an immediate negative impact on transit, on our ridership, on revenues, on the economy as a whole. And at that time, no one knew what the future held. We didn't know what we didn't know. And accordingly, in acting conservatively, the NCTD board had directed that no staff increases should be included in the FY 2021 budget. So since that time, over the last 12 months, a lot of different things have happened. We did hear from Yoon in the prior presentation about the receipt of the CARES Act funds and how that is helping us balance and maintain our budget, at least going into fiscal 2023. In October, we did also have the board approve 2 separate memoranda of agreement with the SMART Union. The SMART Union represents 2 different groups here, our dispatchers and our control center technicians. Those MOAs each included a 2.5% cost of living increase over FY 2020 base wages for those employees. In terms of our operating budget performance year to date through the end of Q2, December 31, 2020, our operating expenses are $9.1 million under budget. So one of the things we've also done at this time is taken a look around us to see what our cities and transit agencies that are in the region are doing in terms of their salary increases. We surveyed the whole area, and from all the responses that we got back, we did see that several agencies and entities are providing cost of living adjustments for their employees. So this chart here is just a brief summary of the information that we got from the cities and transit agencies that did respond to our survey. So I know that we all recognize the importance of attracting and maintaining a highly qualified workforce. Certainly one of the components to that is making sure that we keep an eye on balancing internal equities and external equities, and keeping in mind our budget capacity as well. So based on all the information that we have, NCTD is recommending that the represented employee groups, non-represented, I'm sorry, employee groups do receive a 2.5% wage increase at this time.
Karen, I'm sorry, question?
Yes.
While
Yes.
you're here. Give us an example of non-represented.
Non-union. So everyone that is not in those two groups of groups from the union, the dispatchers or the control center technicians.
So
Okay.
finance staff, planning staff, transit staff,
Yeah,
Karen.
marketing, finance.
Okay.
Ev-
And that would include our drivers?
No, those are not our direct employees. So this
Oh,
is
because
for NCPD direct employees. If the board recalls, we did go through and collaborate with MV Transportation as they renegotiated their agreements with their represented groups. And we did provide, working in collaboration with MV for increases for drivers and mechanics, helping ensure that those groups are properly paid and maintaining equity and being able to support the recruitment and retention. So that was about 5-6 months ago.
Okay. And how did you come up with the 2.5%? I mean, I know the chart and all that, but why 2.5?
So the 2.5% just helps us maintain the internal equity that we have with our union groups. And it also, when you do kind of look at the chart, kind of falls in line with the range that you saw across the agency, someone as high as 3, some a little higher. So we're just looking to balance that out at a reasonable amount.
Okay. Okay. And it's 95 employees.
Approximately, yes.
Okay. And it's 100,000, right?
Correct. And that is a fully burdened cost. So that would include not just the increase to the wages, but also any benefit impact that it would have in terms of PERS or any other Social Security, FICA taxes, things like that, anything else that is impacted in terms of benefits by someone's salary.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. All right.
Yeah, and so Board Member Edson or Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you, Tony. I am supportive of this request. I know that it shows that Solana Beach on the slide has a 0% increase, but we actually worked with all of our unions and our non-union employees as well. And everyone agreed to 0 until a certain time. So we will be taking some action soon. But in addition to that, we provided them with some perks, like really extended time off over the holidays, and made a policy change to allow them to cash out some of their vacation pay after they'd taken a certain amount. So while it shows that we did nothing, we actually did. And I think that there's creative ways to work around, but in this case, we are trying to match in equity. And I'm very supportive of the 2.5% COLA.
That's a motion. I'll second it.
Go to the next slide.
Oops, I went too far. Okay. So sorry, just one more quick slide. Thank you. Just want to review the authority for the requested action. So we have 2 items, board ordinance number 4 and board policy number 19, that both delegate responsibility for staff oversight to the executive director. And then board policy 17, which we also just heard about, does authorize the executive director to transfer funds between divisions as long as the overall total budgeted amount doesn't exceed anything that was approved by the board for that respective fiscal year.
Yeah, so no motion is necessary,
no
but I
motion.
do appreciate the support that we've heard. You know, one of my comments is just watching the staff over the course of this COVID-19 pandemic work has just been truly inspirational to me. We've gotten a lot of things done, and I think this is important for the employees to see that their efforts are being recognized because they have kicked butt during this time period.
Yeah, and I
Agree.
that with CARES Act funding coming in and such, it would have been, it wasn't fiscally impossible for them to have their raise, but it was the public perception, I don't think was appropriate. So they just kept their nose to the grindstone and kept working. And so I think that this is appropriate way to acknowledge that.
Agree.
So with that, we will move on to the next item, which is Yuen Park Lynch and Matt Tucker, and they're going to talk about the NCTD position on proposed changes to the regional fair ordinance.
And I think I'm going to try to advance this a little quick, just out of the fact that I want the general counsel to get her performance review. Oh, boy. So I'm going to ask you to kind of advance the slide forward to a slide number 3, which is the MTS Executive Committee recommendation, which includes allowing the best fare capabilities. So that's the fare capping. It includes the reduction of the youth single ride fare from $2.50 to $1.25. Would keep all other fares at the current rate, so no fare increases. But it also now adds a free transfer with a one-way fare with Pronto card. This is going to be for bus and trolley, will not be the case for the coaster. And it will allow an option to increase fares in 2025, which I don't know what this point really means. So that's where they are at in terms of their board. Just as your executive director, I don't think I have, after consulting with Yoon, I think we're generally supportive of the MTS Executive Committee recommendation. But I do want to caveat this a little bit, that I do think our board needs to take a firm position about opposing additional fare reduction proposals that do not identify a source of funding to immediately pay for it. The region has gotten into a little bit of discussion of lowering fares without the offsets. I think I'm starting to accrue a lot of tenure here in San Diego. So I remember during the Great Recession, what it was like for both transit agencies and the public floggings that the CEOs got. And we were told to fix our problems. Right now, we're kind of faced in this environment where people are believing that we can reduce revenues and reduce fares, and that doesn't have consequences. It will have consequences long-term. And I'm not opposed one way or the other way to different things that people may recommend, but I do think we owe it to be able to pay for future fare reductions if additional ones are going to be proposed. So accordingly, our staff recommendation would be that the board adopt a support position for the MTS, but that we would make also a clear statement at that board that additional proposals need to be offset with an identified source of revenue, so that we're not in a position where we're having discussions about the youth opportunity pass or other things in the vacuum of not knowing where the revenue is going to come from to cover such costs. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. We are coming to the board in March with the recommendation. As staff, that's kind of the recommendation that I intend to bring forward. But I did want to give you all a preview and to kind of take some feedback from you all before we get to the March board meeting.
Yeah, thanks. And I did, we had a Standag meeting at which Mayor Gloria asked what the transit agencies thought of an increase in, sales tax revenue, and, might that make it possible to forego any fare increases. And, the buzz around the increased fares, I don't think was positive. And so I did reach out to Nathan Fletcher to see where they were at, because I think from our last board meeting, the presentation showed it was very clear that the increased fare was not something that was necessary for NCTD, but there was, MTS was in an entirely different position, and we were joined at the hip. So with MTS taking this action at their executive directors meeting, I'm happy to get on board with that. And I think it does make sense to make it clear that reductions in fares without an associated increase in dollars from somebody somewhere is important approach, a good policy. So I don't see any other hands up. So I'll take that to mean that you all agree with the direction that we're headed.
I support your comments.
I'll just make one comment. Generally, Matt, I have no disagreement with the direction you're going, but I would point out that NCTD has gotten a boatload of money from the feds, right? And I'm sure the MTS has as well. So I think that's where some of the rationale is coming. Hey, we've got all this money, we can use it to subsidize fare reductions, and to a certain extent that makes sense to me. Having the NCTD or the MTS hold on to tens of millions of dollars doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but that's where I'm understanding maybe some of that thinking and debating is coming from. But Matt, I generally will support what you're saying here.
Okay, and just for clarification, so this would represent one-time money, and so our board policy would always be opposed to implementing a fare reduction for which we didn't have a continuing source of money to pay. The second piece is that all of this money comes with strings, and generally speaking, when we get a federal dollar, we have about 3 years to spend it. These dollars will likely convert back to capital dollars after probably 12 months to 18 months, depending upon how the nation recovers. So it's really no opportunity at all, Dan, whatsoever, to say that I'm going to permanently plug the budget. And in fact, if we are able to navigate this and convert it to capital, all of this money would be immediately committed to capital projects and hopefully spent over the next over 24 months.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to comment that I'm glad we're not pursuing any fare increases. I just think that timing is really bad on that. So I definitely support this.
Yes, and I think that the reduction in fares will, I think for the youth, it's going to give us an idea of what that might mean to ridership, whether there's an uptick, and maybe that will create some sort of momentum for the state legislature to and governor to take some action to eliminate fares and plus up transit agency budgets for those holes that would be created by that sort of thing. I think it's always very popular to talk about free stuff, but providing the service, as everybody here knows, is not free. So we have to figure out how we can offset that. So thanks, Matt, for that presentation. I think you have the direction there. With that, we will be moving into closed session where we have one item, which is pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. We will do a public employee performance evaluation of our general counsel, Lori A. Winfrey.
Thank you, Chair. We will see you in closed session.
All right, so did we get a link for that, or are we staying here?
There's a link.
Okay.
I like open public session reviews of the general.
Is it a different link?
It's in the calendar.
Okay, let me go back. I didn't look at it.
Okay. All right, so the board is returning from closed session with no reportable action.
Okay. Very good. So the next scheduled meeting is March 18th, 2021 at 2 p.m. And if nobody else has any other comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.